and welcome for this third episode dedicated to information architecture. So, this episode is taken from a serie on information architecture. If you don't know what information architecture is already, I highly encourage you to listen to the number 1 and 2, in which I talk successively about, in the first one, an introduction to information architecture, going through a definition, why is information architecture important, some good design practices related to information architecture. And then in the second one, we start to talk about research methods for information architecture. And by that, I mean card sorting, including the data analysis that comes with card sorting. And we left it there in the last episode. So again, I highly encourage you to listen to the first two. If you already know about these topics, you can jump right in. And in this episode, we'll cover some alternatives when it comes to information architecture research methods. So we'll see the open card sort, the closed card sorting, hybrid, and moderated versus unmoderated card sorting. Before talking about the tree testing, when should you use the tree testing, how to analyze the data. Then we'll cover how you could choose your UX research method to assess or generate a new information architecture depending on your needs. And by needs, I mean, what is your research question, what is your problem statement, and so on. And we'll finalize with how can you plan a research project involving an information architecture. So let's jump right in. We'll begin with some alternatives when it comes to UX research methods related to information architecture. So as I was saying last time, in the last episode, I took the example of the open card sorting. So the open card sorting is the most commonly used, but it's a methodology in which you have participants organizing topics into what makes sense for them, and then you ask them to give names to these categories. So it's the most common because it's in general the one that is used when you want to redesign or when you want to create from scratch an information architecture. Then you have you ask the participants to sort content into categories that make sense for them, and they are the ones to choose which are the categories. They are the ones to label the categories. This is really because you want them to create these categories and to label them because these are your research questions. You basically want to have an information architecture created from scratch, including the labels that make sense. Now, let's say, imagine you're a step ahead in the product development lifecycle, and you already have an idea of the categories, the main categories you would have, let's say, on your website or on your app. And so you have a first level of categories. Imagine you have an e-commerce website with categories such as the gender. You can have, the type of sport, anything, the occasion, anything. Or the type of clothes, if it's the top, if it's the bottom, and so on. And so imagine you have some first layer of categories, and you think this could be a good way to proceed, to move on with these categories, but then you don't know what are the deeper levels, and in each categories, how would the users and customers imagine how they expect to access their content. In this case, a good methodology is to use closed card sorting. So the difference with the open card sort is that in this one, you already provide the categories to your participants. Let's say, for instance, men, women, kids, a birthday, a beach, and so on. And then you would ask your participants to sort the cards into these categories that are already pre-given. Such as, imagine you have a card which is swimsuit or pants or whatever, So this is the main difference with the open card sort. And then you have the hybrid card sorting. It's really, as the name implies, it's a mix between the open and the closed card sort. So you would have some categories that you would give your participants, and you would ask them to put the cars into these categories, but also mentioning that they can also create categories on their own. I will then go further on the explanation about which one you should use at which moment of the product development lifecycle, which one you should use depending on your problematic. And finally, you have also another type of distinction regarding card sorting, which is it moderated or is it unmoderated? So you have various ways to do a card sort. So moderation includes, of course, having someone moderate, as the name implies, the tests, the sessions with the users. And by this we mean having a facilitator who will be there to potentially listen to the participant thinking out loud in live, and who would be able to ask follow-up questions live. And again, I'm insisting on the word live because now you have some unmoderated. So for the record, unmoderated is when your participant is doing the tests or the research, the card sort, by him or herself. You can now, with some new tools, online unmoderated tools, ask follow-up questions. But it's not exactly the same because the questions are scripted. All participants have the same questions, even if you have some different behaviors shown by some participants. You cannot ask ad hoc questions. So this is the main difference. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that due to these differences, sometimes depending on the topic and depending on the project, one is better than the other, indeed, depending on the context. So this is for the alternatives to open card sort. We have the closed card sorting, the hybrid card sorting, and the moderated card sorting. Now let's move on to the other famous research method when it comes to information architecture. So until now, we were talking about card sort, which is here to generate a new information architecture. But now let's also consider tree testing. Tree testing is used to evaluate a site structure and labels by assessing the findability of the content. So basically, it's an evaluative method. It implies that you already have something in place that you want to evaluate. And so how does that work? Really quickly. Basically, you have users who will be given a simplified version of your site information architecture in the form of a tree, and you would ask them to complete a set of tasks with that information. So by this definition, there are two things to consider. The first one is that you are giving your users a simplified version of your site information. So by this, I mean there is no polished and finished, let's say, UI. It's only, if I may, a tree. So it's really, imagine these old websites that we had in 98, 99 maybe, or maybe discovered that late. Maybe it was even before. For sure it was before. In which you didn't have, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. If there are some developers listening to me, I'm so sorry if I'm making any mistake. But when there were no CSS, I don't know exactly when that was, the websites were, in terms of UI, really horrible. You just had some links, and sometimes it just took the form of a tree, and it was really, really ugly. Well, this is what we show to participants for a tree test. But this is not for the sake of being ugly, or this is not because we cannot show another thing. In fact, we do when we show prototypes. It's just because we have other preoccupations at this stage. We want to assess only one thing, which is information architecture. And when you learn a bit about experimental design, the science of designing experiments, and what you should test, what you should provide to your participants to test the right thing, you begin to to learn that anything that you show to your participant that is not needed can add, how can I say, can add more, can take away more than it can add, basically. That's the idea. So imagine you want to test the information architecture, but only the information architecture. By showing a polished UI, you might not measure what you think you will measure. So because your user might see, I don't know, call to actions, headers, and so on, with some colors, with some shapes, with some behavior on the website, and it might lead him or her to find the answer, bias them, when you only want to see the information architecture. So it's super important to show only the tree, the navigation tree. So basically, concretely speaking, it's only a list of links, and when you click on the first level links of the hierarchy, it works like, let's say, accordion, and then it opens what's inside this level, and you have subcategories and then subcategories until you reach the end of the tree. And then the second aspect of what I was saying about how does tree working work, you also should consider that the test of the tree tests involves setting some tasks and giving some tasks to your participant to basically assess the findability. You have an architecture, and basically the task will involve your participant finding something in the tree, and you're giving a task to see if they manage to find this thing in the tree. I will then develop what do we mean by task. But spoiler alert, it will be exactly or really, really close to what we say in usability tests, to the tasks we give in usability tests. So now, what questions can a tree test help you answer? Well, first of all, do my labels make sense? In fact, you're giving an information architecture tree with only labels. So if your labels don't make sense, your user will not find anything in your information architecture, because this is the only thing that your user is seeing. It's a list of labels, basically, which are clickable, and then it expands. Then, is my content grouped logically? Even if the labels are correct, if the content is not organized logically, your users will not find what they look for. Then, are the main categories intuitive to my users? Because in fact, when you give a tree, the users only see the first categories, the first layer. So if they're not finding let's say the deeper levels, what's in the deeper levels, it may be because your first layer is misleading. And then finally, are there some hierarchy issues? Maybe there are some deeper levels that the users expect to be more at the root, more at the first layer. So this is all your tree testing can answer as questions. Now, how can you run a tree test? How is a tree test run? So first of all, get your site or app or anything structure ready. Get the structure ready. By this I mean outline everything in a spreadsheet, in a Miro board, but basically a list of all your items. And not only that, like really, as I was saying in the first episode of this series, in the intro, representing it using the deliverables we use when we talk about information architecture, meaning the sitemap or a spreadsheet, basically. Have it already so that you just have to copy it to the user testing platform. Because spoiler alert, yes, tree testing is more done unmoderated than moderated because it's an evaluative method. Then create some tasks. And as I was saying, the tasks are the same as in a usability test. So basically, there is some anatomy to consider when we consider a task. A usability task in general has let's say, two main components. You have the first component, which is the context. You tell your users why they are here. Imagine, so it can be like, you're planning to to book a flight for your summer holidays, for instance, something like this. So this is the context. You're laying out a context for your users. And then you can ask them, you can give them a task which is goal-oriented. Goal-oriented means trying to put yourself in the shoes of the customer. And I know it's not easy. It's not easy to put yourself in the shoes of the customer at this step of the process. But just imagine if you were a customer looking to book a flight, what could be your goal, your end goal, and what would be the motivation to book a flight so that you can phrase a task accordingly to this goal. So for instance, you're planning to book a flight for a summer holidays. Indicate with the prototype enclosed how you would find the summer deals, for instance. It could be an example. So I'm running out of inspiration here. So maybe this is not the best example because if summer deals, for instance, but it's also a good example for me to tell you what not to do. If summer deals is in your tree, well, your customer will find it super easily. So the first good practice is not to have the terms that are in your tree in your task, because it will be too leading and your participant will find it easily. They will be too biased. Then another thing is not to be too directive. So you cannot say to your participant, click here, click there, head over here, head over there. You cannot. It has to be goal-oriented. And the third part, sorry, I said there were two, but the third part is actually not what you say to your participant. It's just you in your software or platform when you do user testing. You should also select what is a good answer. What is the good answer? Sometimes the platforms allow you to publish a task or to publish a test without selecting that. Verify that, really, because it's only this way you will be able to compute the success rates and other metrics we will just cover just after related to tree testing. It's only this way you can assess how your information architecture is making sense. You have to indicate to the software what is the expected answer so that they can compute the level of the success rates and all of the metrics. Also, another good practice is to keep the test short. So I would say 15 minutes, 20 minutes is really the maximum. Also knowing that in general, you have to compensate your customers the more they stay on your platform. So be careful. And so as a reference, I think it's good to have a maximum of 10 tasks. Then define your testing approach. Should it be moderated? Should it be unmoderated? As I was saying before, two things. The first thing is that, a tree testing is in general more unmoderated. You may already have understood why, because it's evaluative per nature, and in general we seek quantity. We seek validation of insights. We do not seek a deep exploration of customer motivations and needs. This is not the step. But it can make sense sometimes to have a moderated tree testing. It's not impossible, but just define your testing approach. And finally, launch. Basically, when I say launch, I would consider it in two steps. First, have a dry run. It's super important to have a dry run. And in general, I do two types of dry run. There is dry run with my colleagues. And by this, I mean colleagues who are not directly. So you can have three steps of dry run. Sorry. You can have some colleagues who are in the project team, so they know what you're up to. It's not basically not just a dry run. It's like more giving feedback, asking for feedback. So you ask them for feedback if the tasks are understandable, if everything is working well with the platform, and so on. Then you can ask another set of colleagues, but the ones who are a bit less in the project, who know less what you're up to. And this can also be good because they're not a participant already, so you will not compensate them, but you can already gather some feedback related to which will not be biased by being of the project, because sometimes we write a task for us. It's it's a basic, let's say, vocabulary, or because we are confronted with this all the time, but sometimes it's not understandable, really, because the copy is not accessible. So, yeah, double, triple check your test. And then finally, I would run some dry run with real participants. But it's like, imagine you have planned to have 100 participants. Try on 2 or 3, maybe 5, to see if everything is working well. So this is approximately all for running a tree test in a nutshell. Then, how can you analyze the output of a tree test? So you run your tree test, you gathered your insights. Let's take the example that it's unmoderated. So when a tree test is given unmoderated, you are interested, as I was saying, in quantitative insights. You want to be able to have as much data as possible to validate quantitatively and statistically that your tree, your information architecture, is making sense. So in this regard, we will have some metrics that we have into account when we want to assess a tree test, when we want to compute and analyze data at the output of a tree test. So in this case, you will have the success rate, which corresponds to the percentage of users who succeeded the task. So basically, you have 100 users, 20 found what you were asking for, finding the summer deals, and you have 20% of success rate, basically. And this is just a measure of how your content is findable. Of course, when you do a tree test, in general, you don't have only one task. So you have several tasks because you want to assess several levels of the hierarchy. You can choose your task. By the way, I didn't mention, and I'm sorry for that. You can choose your tasks based on some criteria. For instance, what makes sense for the business, what you think your customers will be more attracted to. So what leads to more revenue and so on. So if, for instance, the summer deals make more sense, go for it. So yeah, basically that. And so the success rate is a measure of how your content is findable, just if it is findable or not, yes or no. But then you have other metrics, because something can be findable. It doesn't mean that I'm having an easy time to find it. And so you have other metrics which indicate indirectly how a user is struggling to find the content. And you have several in this case. You have the time spent, the path they take, the directedness. Directedness is the fact of being able to find something on the first attempt. And then you have the first clicks. It's where a user is clicking at first. So, of course, naturally, it will be your first layer of categories, your first layer of the tree. And so this is important because if your user is not finding at first where to go in the tree, the first category, the first layer, chances drop significantly. I can then embed something in the show notes, an article showing that there are some statistics that were run, but it's like, imagine you have several roads to take. You're without a GPS, you're without a map, and you have several roads to take to go somewhere. If you take the wrong road, the chances for you to find your destination will drop significantly every time you're on the wrong road. And the biggest drop is at the first choice, the first intersection, of course. So that's why it's a measure that is a lot used. So then we have how can we interpret this kind of data? So I like to organize, and maybe that's something that can help you in my analysis grids. That's what I was saying in the last episode on card sorting. Having some kind of analysis grids, which is what is the type of insight type of information I can gather, and what is the type of insight that I can derive from this first type of information. And in this case, for tree testing, imagine first scenario, you have low success rates or a low directedness? Well, here, the first click, it might be useful if you have a low success rate to look at the first clicks, because it indicates directly where the users expect to find information and where potentially items should be moved. Now imagine, you can also have a first click that is correct, but the success rate is low. In other words, your participant is finding the first layer, where they should click in the first layer, but then the success rate is low. Well, it can be simply because in the deeper layers, your content is not easily findable. And by this, we mean that the lower level categories might overlap, basically. You can also have some first clicks that are evenly distributed. By this, I mean, imagine you have your 100 participants, you have, let's say, 20 that click on the first category, 20 on another, and 80 on another, or something like this, whatever. Basically here, it means that your users, they expect to find the content, so in the deeper levels, of course, but they expect to find it in several places. And so here, a good thing you can do is cross-reference your content across the different categories. And if you have your first clicks that are evenly distributed, and this happens for several tasks, because all I was saying until now is like for one task, then you have to consider for several tasks. If this is something that happens on a consistent basis, you might have to redesign your whole tree. You might have to go over some card sorting again, because it shouldn't happen. Okay, now how can you choose a methodology depending on your question, depending on your needs? So here in my masterclass that I gave, so for the record, for those who don't know, these series of podcasts, I am doing them for those who couldn't attend my masterclass that I gave recently on information architecture. And so it was a masterclass of 1 hour and a half, and now I'm splitting the content into several podcasts for those who might not have the time to listen into 1 hour and a half. And so it will be very easier for you if you can see what I'm about to say now, because there is a representation that I did in a slide. It will be easier for you, but I will try, for the sake of the podcast, to describe it orally. In any case, the slides, the address where you can find them will be indicated in the show notes. But basically, when we choose a research method, again, it depends on your questions, of course, but you have several types of research methods. So you have to have this in mind. You have generative research methods, and you have evaluative research methods. And the generative research methods will help you to uncover and define the problem at hand. So basically, sometimes you don't even know what is the problem. You need to discover what is the problem. So you need to generate ideas. You don't even have ideas. So imagine you're starting a project on finance. You want to help young adults manage better their finance. Okay. You don't even know what is the problem. What are their problems? Okay. So here you should do generative research to generate ideas, generate really ideas you can write on stickies and something like a substance, because you don't have anything. Okay. And once you have this, so this is done usually with not a lot of participants, qualitative research, more moderated, and so on. Then you have evaluative. Evaluative is when you already have your content, you already know what is the problem, you already know what is interesting to you, and you want to take some decisions. You want to evaluate things, you want to validate, you want to take decisions, steps forward, and so on. So what you do here is basically evaluative research, because you want to validate some concepts, validate ideas, validate hypotheses. This is more done quantitatively and unmoderated in general. So think about surveys, unmoderated usability testing, and so on. Okay, now how can we place our research methods on this axis from the left side, which is generative research methods, to evaluative research methods? Well, from left to right, this is how it works. You have moderated open card sorting, moderated hybrid card sorting, moderated closed card sorting, and moderated tree testing. I will talk after about the unmoderated. But let's go one after the other. Okay, the moderated open card sorting. Why? Well, because you use it when you want to generate a new information architecture, and it's completely open, and your participants have a autonomy and freedom to create the categories they want. Then you have the hybrids. As I was saying, the participants have to put the cards into some categories, but they can also create others. So it's like you validate some categories, but at the same time you allow participants to create others. So it's also a bit generative. Then you have the closed card sort. This one is a bit more validation. But what you will be validating is only one thing. It's the first layer of your information architecture, because you're giving some categories to your users and you ask them to put content in these categories. But you're not giving categories and subcategories and sub and so on, okay? You're just giving the first layer. So it's just for you to assess if the first layer makes sense, if the labels make sense. And then we end with the tree testing. With the tree testing, you have all the categories and you have all the subcategories, and you ask your users to find content in this. So in this case, you validate the whole information architecture. So this is all about the moderated part. For the record, on the top, on the extreme left, you have all the generative research methods. On the extreme right, you have the evaluative research methods. Okay, and now from left to right, moderated open card sorting, moderated hybrid, moderated closed card sorting, and moderated tree testing. Now, if we talk about the unmoderated aspect, it's basically the same thing, the same disposition. So imagine unmoderated open card sorting, unmoderated hybrid, unmoderated closed card sorting, and unmoderated tree testing. The same left to right disposition. The only thing is that imagine you have the moderated before, you slide it a bit to the right. So you do a bit of a how do we say? I forgot my geometry classes. I know the name in other languages, but not in English. You translate a bit all the moderated methods a bit to the right, and then you have all the methodologies in one graph, let's say, but you have all the moderated are a bit more towards the generative. Why? Because for unmoderated, you are less able to ask apropos questions to your participants. You can ask follow-up questions, but for several reasons, it's more validation, because even if you ask follow-up questions, in general, you will not ask a lot of open-ended questions, first of all, because you have a lot of participants. So if you ask a lot of open-ended questions, you will end up burning out analyzing your qualitative data, and it's not possible. You cannot do that on 100 participants. So this is the first thing. Then you cannot ask contextualized questions. And then finally, the number of participants is so high, you cannot go deep and you cannot follow up. This is also another thing. If you ask a question and your participant is not understanding or not answering exactly what you want, you cannot follow up. So that's the reason why unmoderated is in general used more for validation purposes. So just to sum up, we will go over each methodology and I will tell you now what is the goal associated and what is it good for. So let's begin with open card sorting. In open card sorting, you want to generate labels, categories, and define an information architecture from scratch. It's good at the beginning of the product development when you have no information architecture in place and you only have your list of features, but you don't know how it should take form. So as I was saying in the first episode of this series, to create an information architecture from scratch, you don't only need user research. For me, it's irreplaceable user research. You have to do it. It's indispensable. But you can also build some assumptions and some ideas regarding how to create an information architecture by looking at the competition and by taking into account, of course, your content and the business. And so you can begin to have an idea, but open card sort is, in my opinion, indispensable when you begin a project. Then you have the closed card sorting. As I was saying, the goal is to assess a structure and if labels are clear. You want to test if the labels of your first layer are clear. So to do that, you give categories to your participants and you ask them to put content into that. It's good after an open card sort. Imagine after an open card sort, you uncover some first categories. For instance, again, you have your e-commerce website, and I don't know, you have laptops, printers, accessories, and so on. So you know that these could be your first categories, okay? And then you can give them some content that would go in these categories, but you want to make sure that they put it into the right category. Okay, and then we have hybrid card sorting. So it's good when you want to improve an existing structure. You have some structure, and you know that some aspects of it are not good because, I don't know, you saw in the analytics, you saw in your customer database what they're saying, your customer feedback, and so you know that some structures are not looking good. So you want to improve only some of them. So you will give maybe some enclosed, and you will also allow them to create new categories, because this way you can have the best of both. Then there is a distinction between the moderated tests and the unmoderated tests. As I was saying, moderated tests are good to gather qualitative insights and when you need a deep and nuanced understanding of your user. Unmoderated are more used to validate the insights and to size user behavior. So you will use it on a higher number of participants, way higher. I highly encourage you in general for unmoderated to go, depends on the methodology. If your card sort and tree test, 30 is a very, very minimum. If you want to do some survey, questionnaire, and so on, go to higher than 100 in general. Why is that? Because in general, we consider that you will have clusters of participants depending on their answers. Statistically, to be able to conclude, to give meaningful conclusions, you will need to have a representative sample of your population. The statistical laws in general, let's say they begin, quote unquote, begin to take shape at more than 30 participants. These laws that allow you to say, okay, I observed this in my sample of 35 participants, so I can conclude that overall in the population this sample is taken from, this is valid as well, this conclusion. But for that you need at least 30 participants. And so good practice when you do surveys is to have more than 100, because it's really arbitrary, but we in general it's to have a safe, let's say, a security, to think, okay, if we end up with 3 clusters, we have 90 participants, and we take 10 as a margin, 10 more as a margin. This is only statistical stuff, but I take the opportunity to say it now, so that at least it appears in one episode. And so yeah, basically that is all for this third and last episode of this series on information architecture. I was really pleased to give this masterclass. If you're interested in knowing more, I really encourage you to go on the website, which will be in the show notes. I apologize for those who tried to go on the website that initially existed before. I had to change it, so now there is a new address, and I highly encourage you to go on the website. If you want to leave a comment through the website, that would be amazing for me to improve. And yeah, again, if you like the show, subscribe, share it with your friends, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.